Oh, I need to
Great to be with everybody. I'm actually
give you co-host. Yep.
Okay. I'm actually going to go ahead as I just start, and I'm going to post into the chat, because I think this will be the easiest way of doing it, some links for everyone. See if those go through okay. Yes.
Yep.
Right. So on this portion one of the conversation with the athletes, with our three athletes here, and anyone else who's going to jump on or watch this later on, what we've been doing a lot of work on my side, and I guess as my quick introduction, I run the performance lab for VERT, and all I've been doing, as John knows, for the last 4.5 months, 5 months, whatever duration it's been.
However long we've been going, yeah.
Yeah, it's been just looking at previous college loads in the fall, training loads in the spring, and then figuring out kind of the best course of action for how we can get athletes to prepare on their own, and then how we can get programs to best bring you, the athletes, back onto the court. And it really depends on where you are, obviously what level you're at, be it high school, college, or pro. And where I like to start is so how much time, John, do you expect to have with the athletes on court before their first match?
We've got a schedule that's been tentatively given to us where we would spend 7 days doing groups, small groups, no more than 10, and then 14 days where we're allowed to do normal full team practice.
Okay.
Before we were allowed to play our first match. So essentially 3 weeks.
And I'd say the average I'm seeing is about 2 weeks on court, right? So from the athlete perspective, all of you obviously have been home, or some of you have been traveling. And the reason that, I think a big reason John reached out to me to have this conversation now is, given the time frame, the work that athletes can do at home now, and I'm going to go over some basics, it's absolutely imperative that you begin now with some basic foundational movement work and strength work, so that by the time you get on the court, coaches are able to have a higher kind of practice training volume than they otherwise would have had. So the links I posted there, again, that's for players and coaches alike, but for players, in those links are various kind of movement and health programs that have been very well vetted. I'll just quickly chat about them. But one of the things that any athlete is going to want to do, and this will lead into practice as well, so this would be something that coaches want to look at, is the fancy term for it is a neuromuscular training program. All that really means is a standardized warm-up. And this is something you can do daily. And what's beautiful is the links I put up there, fit2play.org, University of Calgary. They literally walk you through the program step by step, move by move. And I like to really clarify, these are things that are incredibly safe. You don't need any lifting equipment. It's just to get kind of a foundation of movement set for you. I'm going to share my screen here to show this presentation. I know, Haley, you're driving, so don't worry. I'm not going to, oh no, you're riding. You're not driving, so you can watch.
Yeah, riding, yeah.
Right?
So if I don't answer any questions, just know I'm still listening.
No problem. So let me get this fired up. All right, so everyone sees the presentation there?
Yep, all good.
John, I always like to give credit where it's due. This is kind of a mishmash of presentations I've been doing with Carlin Stilling, who's a colleague of mine at the University of Calgary. She works with their injury prevention research.
Very good.
Someone you might actually want to have on soon as well.
All right.
I like to show this, and this is youth up to collegiate. This little pyramid, it's a simple visual, but this is what you need to start focusing on as athletes at home on your own. The skill work you shouldn't be worrying about right now. That's on the Johns of the world. That's on your coaches to get you ramped up and ready to go. What you need to be working on right now is getting your body physically ready to be able to handle like a true collegiate volleyball match, not just a practice. You want to be ready for a match. So we're looking at mobility, stability, and capacity. Mobility, I'm not going to go in depth. I think you all know mobility is just critical to make sure you have a good range of motion, being in the hips, the ankles, and the shoulders, most importantly. And then you have stability. Now, I'm not sure what you all are doing currently at home, and I've decided I'm not going to put you on the spot in front of coach to tell me what you all are doing out of home. It was a debate I had. You're willing to share what you're doing. You can chime in and chat about it whenever you want. But what I want to make sure you all understand is that it can be incredibly, incredibly simple what you're doing at home. You don't need to be lifting weights. Given, like, what are your kind of scenarios? What do you have to work with in terms of space? That is a question I can have, and I'll start with Gina first. Like, do you have a yard? Are you stuck in an apartment? What's your situation?
For a little bit in the beginning of like this whole COVID stuff, I was stuck in my apartment, which is like minimal space. But since like, I think a little bit in May, my boyfriend's from Michigan, so I've come here to live with his mom to work with an internship with her, and she has a huge yard, a really nice like neighborhood. So like I've been running every day. I've been working out like with my boyfriend and his like workout plan for the lacrosse season. Mm-hmm. So I've been since May, I've been had like a good amount of space and time to like work out and train and stuff.
Awesome. Haley?
I have a gym membership at Planet Fitness, so that's what I've been doing. Doing like cardio.
That's cool.
Weights. But this past week I haven't because I've been out of town, but before that I was.
All right, cool.
Well, one thing for Haley, when you get back, because you talked about having a quarantine, what's your situation going to be when you get back home?
Probably just stuff in my house. I mean, we just actually moved to a new house, and in our basement we have a weights machine and a treadmill and an elliptical, so that's probably what I'll be doing.
Okay.
Bailey,
you're the last one.
I've just been working out at home, just basically like more so like leg strength training that I learned at physical therapy, mostly that.
What kind of space do you have?
I have a yard. I have a backyard in the house. Pretty spacey.
Good. Yeah, I had a conversation with quite a few teams, and one of the things that was interesting, and I feel like I have to preface all of this with that question of what do you have to work with for safety and concern? Because a lot of the exercises here that some of the things I'm going to be reviewing that are fairly simple, I'll want you to do in socks or barefoot. Okay, so make sure it's not super slippery. But I had one player say, "Hey, I've got a concrete slab, loose rubble, or a dock to work on." So John, just so you know, we ended up going with was as long as the dock's not super splintery with missing planks. Actually, the dock would be best.
Nice.
Trying to fall in the water.
Good balance contribution in there.
Yeah. So just be very mindful of where you are and what you're working with. This is something also bring up talking to coaches, but also so you're aware and just being volleyball players, you probably already know this. These are the main points of concern physically for you all. All right. So you want to make sure you get work in all these different areas. Not that you're going to be doing any. If you somehow get a concussion doing training at home, we're going to have with bigger problems. But make sure that you're being balanced and thorough. And you might not, or you might have the space. Sounds like a lot of you will have the space to actually do some work with a ball, right? But things as simple as taking that volleyball and throwing it against the wall can be very effective. The key, though, is progression of your training load. Okay, I'm going to skip here a little bit. right here. Progression of training load. So this is really cool research, Dr. Tim Gabbett, and he's shown that at your population of athlete, you want to have a roughly, and this is on the court and this is at home with what you're doing, roughly a 10 to 15% increase of training load week over week. So what does that mean? If you're working on ball throws and you're trying to build your hitting capacity in the shoulder and you're like, all right, David, I'm starting today from scratch. We might say, all right, get the ball, warm up, and do, 3 sets of, 10 ball throws, kind of increasing capacity or increasing speed. And maybe you're doing that 3 times a week. It's something that's easy to count. And then week over week, all you need to do is add 10 to 15% to that number. And all that's doing is allowing our shoulder to strengthen, but strengthen in a manner that allows the muscle and the tendon to grow at a more similar rate. And to be really clear with you three on the muscle and tendon, your tendon, as you probably know, is your more connective tissue. It's connecting your muscle to your bone. But some of you, I would imagine, have had, maybe a little knee pain throughout your careers, things of that nature. More likely, that's going to be your patellar tendon. And if you have, dysfunction there, it can actually lead to decreased jump height, not just pain. So everything you're doing right now at home, and it sounds like a lot of you guys are training on your own, which is great, being mindful of how much you're doing and how you grow it. So if you're, for example, I think it was Gina, you said you're training with your boyfriend who's doing he's training for rugby. A lot of the foundational stuff he's going to be doing. What?
Lacrosse.
Lacrosse. A lot of the stuff he'll be doing is going to be great. It's going to be fine, right? You don't need to think, right now we're not thinking of crazy sport-specific stuff. If you're doing your squats, your lunges, your running, that's great. That's fine. The skill will come later. But you are going to want to start obviously implementing some jump rudiments work in. So what I'm talking about now is plyometric training. And where I'm going to start is, especially on your own, I would not recommend at this stage doing high-level plyometrics. A lot of depth jumps where you jump off a box and jump again, or like maximal jumps one after another, that are going to be really, really high intensity. And the reason is that actually strengthens muscle faster than it strengthens your tendon. So have any of you been doing any work on isometrics, where you just kind of hold a position and stay put for 20 to 40 seconds?
I guess a little bit. Like more like planking, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, plank's incredibly popular. So, and that's what I guess. I don't see that in a lot of general programming, especially at home. Part of the reason, I think, is it's unbelievably boring. Right?
Yes. Very.
It's just boring. But this may be one of the more important things you can take away from this talk is when you're trying to strengthen a tendon, isometrics is one of the best ways. In fact, it's probably the best way without weights that you can do so. So the little image I have here of this gentleman who's doing what looks like an improper lunge, this is one of the best isometric moves. I don't care what position in volleyball you are, even libero, doesn't matter, you can do. It's where you get into a kind of lunge position, get onto more of the mid to forefoot and drive your knee out to about the toe and kind of try to lean and put pressure on your knee. And what you're going to be doing is, holding for about 20 to 30 seconds. And you can do that for 1 to 3 sets. And honestly, I'd like you to be doing that twice a day. Now, it's only a total of roughly 2 minutes per leg holding, right? So you're looking at 4 minutes, 8 minutes total, max. 8 minutes total. And if you can do this 3-4 times a week minimum, research has shown that in less than 6 weeks, there is a tremendous adaptation to tendon strength, right? A way that you guys can fight against those patellar tendinopathy, those just chronic overuse, annoying, nagging injuries. You can do the same thing, really basic, standing up against the wall, getting on one leg and doing a calf raise, but holding that for, again, 20 to 30 seconds, resting, getting on the other leg. Especially given what you told me you're already doing, this is where I'm going to really add that focus, because adding this into your work can pay dividends down the road, not just for health, but also it's going to help with your landing, your jump performance, because if you have that tendon stronger, it can actually return more energy and allow you to create a better ground reaction force, right? So as weird as it seems, sitting in a weird lunge position can help you jump higher. So I'd highly recommend you start adding that in, and you can start adding that in whenever. It's very safe to do. Once you've done this for, 2 or 3 weeks, you can do something simple like put on a backpack, or if you have weights, hold a little bit of weight. You do not need to add more than maybe 10 pounds. But focus on holding and focus on driving towards the part of the body you're trying to manipulate, that knee. Get some pressure on that knee. Knee issues tend to happen if you hold a bad position for extended period of times under heavy load, or, high impact repetitive in a bad position. So if we can get ourselves into position, like this is where our knee should be, not our hips, but where our knee should be when we land roughly, right? So that's where we're going to put it in that position and try to hold. Does anybody have any questions on that? It's as simple as I'm kind of explaining it to be. And yes, I know it's boring, but absolutely, absolutely critical that you try to implement that. And this is something, John, to be clear, I don't care what level of athlete, right? This is something I had conversations with Miami Heat. They are doing the exact same things with their player when they were getting ready to bring them back into the bubble over in Orlando. Mm-hmm. These isometric holds are really, really important. Cool?
Yep. Just from my perspective, would you carry this on through the season, or is it just you're trying to think more in the preparation phase?
You absolutely can. Yeah, you can carry this on throughout the season. It's just your tendons are getting more work during the season, so it's
Right.
not. I would argue it won't be as effective potentially, depending on what you're doing. The reason why is after about 10 minutes, tendon adaptation, for all intents and purposes, stops. So this isn't one of those things where you're like, I'm going to hold this isometric move for 30 minutes and get better and stronger. Don't think like a holding a plank. The longer you hold it, you're thinking the more muscle fiber I can tear, the stronger it'll become. With tendons, it doesn't work that way. If you hold this for 20 minutes, you can damage yourself. Like the tendon's just not going to get any stronger. So that's why, again, when you look at things like plyometric activities and two people are doing plyos, if you start doing plyos, even basic plyos, which I'm going to talk about next, you don't want to do it for more than, in terms of training time, a few minutes. Right? 20 minutes worth of plyometric work can actually be the opposite of what you're trying to accomplish. It can be detrimental. So yeah, these are things that are safe. You can do throughout the season. You might not want to do them or need to do them every day. You can, but again, it's just going to be like a 30-second hold. The reason why it might change is if you did a lot of work, right? You had a high intense practice day, and then you do this, you've kind of already passed that adaptation phase,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it would be more like on a day off, or we had a really low day, things of that nature.
Sure.
Right. I'd recommend implementing this throughout the season, but it'd be most effective now.
Okay, good.
Okay. I'll kind of go back to this side, even though I reviewed it already. The next thing, when I was talking about plyometrics, right? People think plyos, think like fast, hard jumps. The other thing I think you should all start implementing probably 2 to 3 times a week, and it'll only take you to start 5 minutes. Is going to be what are called kind of rudimentary low-level plyometrics. And what I mean by that is hands on the hips, stiff legs, so we're not like jumping. Like I want a very minimal knee bend, and jumping not on your toes, but not flat. So kind of on that, the pad of your foot, and doing just quick kind of stiff plyometric hops. You can do them in place. You can do them front, back, side to side. And if you were to start that today, I'd say, look, set up, have a little stopwatch, and start hopping and do it for 10 to 15 seconds. Rest 30 seconds to a minute and do 3 sets of that. And that would be it, literally. Continue doing the strength training you're doing because you have time to progress week over week. Like I said, we're looking at 10 to 15% increase in load. Repeat that for a few days and then start adding, 5, 10 seconds, 5 seconds until you get up to about 45 seconds. And then the max you're going to work on for this is about 3 sets of 45 seconds, 2 to 3 times a week. And as simple as that sounds, the reason it's important is that, again, there's 2 parts of that building that tendon and that muscle, that long duration hold, but also, let's face it, most of what you're doing is going to be explosive, right? But we're not going to go out and jump 150 times at home maximally, right? Even though you might have that in a practice in several weeks from now. So you want to work on kind of those pogo jumps. When you get more comfortable, you can start doing some single leg work, right leg, left leg. And again, this is based on time. You're going to work yourself up over the course of about 2.5, 3 weeks to 3 sets of about 45 seconds of those little hops. And what that'll do is it'll start not just build your tendon capacity, but it is building your jump volume even though they're minimal because they're going to be relatively high impact because you're doing them stiffly. All right? Everybody kind of follow? Again, it's going to be very similar to jump rope. Make sure you're not too on your toes because that's where we start to develop more kind of shin stress reactions. But you also don't want to be flat. I don't want your heels to be hitting the ground either. So these, again, implement these into any kind of strength training you're already doing. Warm up, and you can roll through these 2 to 3 times a week. And the reason we're looking at those numbers is within 45 seconds, you could get 45 to 60 jumps in. If you're doing 3 sets of that, right, you could be getting upwards of, 120, 180 jumps. Now, these are very, very minimal jumps. But the reason those numbers, we're using those specifically, is because these are, let's go to this one. These are your numbers. These are your average jump numbers for middles and outsides in really what comes out to a 4-set match. So this is what we're trying to build your tolerance for, right? And you're going to go above this. You're going to be below this in practices. But physically, we want you to be able to handle this many jumps, A, safely, and B, while being able to maintain explosiveness, stiffness, and resilience. Okay? So if you can work yourself up to that volume 2, 3 times a week, you're getting those jumps, that's going to be very advantageous. And when you come to practice, John's not going to have to feel like he has to start you guys at 30 jumps because you're starting from scratch, right? That's the whole idea, is to be able to come into practice and be able to start at a higher jump load volume, because you all are going to be itching to play volleyball, obviously. And that's the other really important point I like to make is, especially with a coach like John, he's still going to ease you into it with the time allotted to him. So I hope this also helps you understand why you're going to have certain jump numbers in practice and certain concepts, is because the idea is work the body in and grow it. But the more work you do now, leading up to the basics, leading into practices in the games, the more confidence it gives you and your coaches in having a higher work volume when you do start back on the court. Cool? So as I guess a kind of summary, this is what I want you all to focus on, especially with what you're already doing. I'm not going to give you a full workout routine. Frankly, it's not entirely necessary, especially with those links I gave you. Work those neuromuscular training warm-ups. Do those for anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes every day if you can before you do your workouts. And these kind of concepts, ideally, we'd like you to do before every practice as well, like moving forward. There's some great stuff in there, John. A lot of it's super basic. A lot of it you guys probably already do. But research has shown, as far as acute injury, like the ankle sprains or ACL or meniscus tears, things of that nature, doing a neuromuscular training protocol, like one like these that have been researched, has shown in youth athletes to have a 30 to 70% decrease in acute injury rate. I mean, it's incredible. Like, it really, really, really helps. So that's why if you all can review those neuromuscular training videos, they make it really simple, very straightforward, and just make it habit. If it's not habit, it's not going to happen. Make a plan and make it habit, and do those before every time you train. Do those neuromuscular training warm-ups. It's going to go a long way. With that, I'll kind of open it up to any questions, whether they be general or specific.
Yeah, we lost Haley because she was losing connectivity, but she was hoping to jump back on once she got to the airport. Whether we're still going on this, we'll see. Gina, Bailey, either of you got anything you want to ask?
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm kind of just trying to take in everything and look at all my notes and stuff. I don't really have any questions for right now.
Cool. And I will note also, and John, I'll send this to you that you can share. I created a jump kind of progression sequence that a lot of programs have been implementing with, what they've been sending home for athletes to do. Now, a lot of the programs, admittedly, the players have a VERT sensor. For some, you don't need one, obviously. Let me stop sharing actually real quick, because it's not high numbers. You can just count. But it's just a simple progression. So while you're doing this work too, it'll start, roughly, let's say 6 weeks before, match. If they're at home or if they're at the court, it's important to start with, 3 sets of 4 maximal block jumps, 3 sets of 5 maximal approach jumps. Do that Monday, Wednesday, and then Friday add 1 extra set. Right? And so you start to just work in some of those maximal jumps as well. We're not looking at crazy volumes. You're looking at anywhere from starting at, 20 to 30. But if you can get up to 3 times a week, 60 to 70 maximal style jumps, plus you're doing a lot of those low-level plyometrics, when that athlete comes on the court, you can confidently start, if they've been doing the work, you can confidently start at, those higher jump numbers of 70s, 80s, if need be, given the time. I saw a question here.
Just a comment from Rodrigo at Benfica.
Okay, yes, that was actually a great question. I have a slide on that. So this is it's a debate in the kind of sports performance world of which isometrics are most effective. But this is what he's talking about, where you have shorter holds with contraction and release. These have also been shown to be effective. This, I consider this to be slightly more advanced. This is something I do with maybe a little more supervision. Athletes can do this as well. The fascinating part is there's research that supports both as being effective. This one right here, this was a study, this one I believe was specifically looking at this is probably more information than anybody needs, but it's referred to as the extracellular matrix of the tendon unit. So it's part of what develops those tissues, and how do we adapt that portion of the tissue to strengthen the tendon itself. And they found with this one, I think it was a 6-week study, that there was a statistically significant increase in tendon strength. They did actual biopsies, not just ultrasound on the tendon. So it was a really good study. But yeah, long answer to the quick question. Absolutely. That's going to be very effective for helping build that tendon capacity as well.
Okay. Gina, it sounded like maybe you had a question.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have lower back issues, and I was just thinking, is there any like limitations or anything that I can do more with my time now before I would come back?
Yeah, really good question. So obviously there's going to be a lot of variables for lower back issues. What's your position on the court?
I'm a libero, but I could be anything.
You're a libero, but you've done some jumping.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting that you're a libero, because the thing is with lower back issues, you tend to see obviously in a lot of front row players and sometimes setters. We'll start off with the basics, right? Typically, the number one on-court issue for lower back issues is going to be landing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did it when.
Okay.
Sorry, I did it when I was jump serving. So like that's when when I landed, that's when everything came about.
Does that sound familiar, John, based on our previous conversations?
I'll say I'm not surprised.
Oh no, I somehow accidentally took that slide out. It doesn't matter. I can still explain it here. Everybody see that high, hard impact landings right now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this visual here is these black lines. Everybody can see those. Those would be your jumps. The red lines are landing impacts. So again, this is from if you're wearing our sensor. This is what we can see. But regardless, this information is very important. Just for a little overview, though, like here's your y-axis. Here's the jump heights. And y-axis, these are Gs. All you need to know of for Gs is think of that as amount of impact energy that's made its way up to your hips and back. Okay? Anything above 20 is really, really high.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these red lines you see here are above 20, meaning this person had 66% of their landings were very elevated. Mm-hmm. This is what we should be seeing. Okay? Very, very low impact landings. Now, the reason I want you to see this is what we found over the last almost 3 years now is almost across the board, the highest landing impact movement is serves. Mm-hmm. And not necessarily top spin serves. Like could be float serves, serves that are 12 to 14 inches high. The reason is a few different kind of twofold primarily is one, you're jumping out a lot, right? There's no net to stop you. So you're in kind of that, and you're in that kind of pike position. So as a result, you're landing either flat-footed or oftentimes, and I would venture to guess this is what happened to you, your heel might actually be hitting first.
Yeah.
Your feet might be in front of you. So what that means is your legs are going to be almost straight. You kind of picture that sort of force vector. Your heels hit, and it's going to go right up to hips and lower back.
Yeah.
And that's unbelievably common. So when I say across the board, I'm saying probably 7 out of 10 athletes in volleyball, that's going to be the harder landing impact. And even comparing a 12 to 14-inch serve to a 25-inch attack, we've seen athletes that attenuate or absorb that 25-inch landing much better because you're landing more straight down. You get the hips and knees, some flexion to cushion. Whereas in serves, you're not giving it as much thought. You're looking at where the ball's going. You're hitting and kind of getting back in position. So that would be one thing just to be mindful of. If you have lower back issues, really give some thought into how many reps you're going to put into those serves. And again, that depends on how often you're going to be serving. I know there's going to be game strategy involved. But that's one thing. The the next thing is going to be kind of posterior chain, glute development, midline stability development, things it sounds like you're already working on. And also just making sure you've got good mobility, good thoracic mobility. If you're not able to really rotate here, that can dramatically affect the lower back because you start to compensate by rotating at the lower back. In fact, well, John's recording this so he can send this to you. I'll show you guys something neat really quickly. That you can all do at home.
Take it off the share screen.
Yeah, thanks.
So see the camera.
Right. So this is I can kind of do it in my little couch here. It's referred to as neurodynamic mobility. Super safe, super simple. And this is something that I recommend for every position, well, frankly, in every sport. But in volleyball, it's really obvious why this is important. It's going to give you a lot more of that thoracic rotation. You don't really want to rotate your lower back. It doesn't want to do that. The rotation is going to come from thoracic and cervical spine. But a lot of times we're limited here. So this is something you can do daily, 3 or 4 times a week. And Gina, something that might in particular help you is you're going to sit down, maybe on a stool or a chair. If you can put a block or something in between your legs to kind of hold on to, that would be ideal. But you're going to put your hands behind your head like this with your elbows straight out. And then what you're going to do is you're going to rotate as far as you can without moving your hips. I know you can't see my hips. We want those hips to stay where they are. You're going to rotate as far as you can, and then you're going to kind of look at the wall and draw a line from your elbow to the wall. You're going to exhale and go into what's called lateral flexion. So you slowly go as far down as you can. Then you come back up, and magically, you're going to be able to rotate dramatically more. Down, back up, rotate more. I have to do the other side or else I'm just going to be super jacked. So excuse me. What I don't want you to do is exhale and then come back to the beginning. Stay here, exhale, go down, come back up, rotate, exhale, go down, come back up, rotate. Do that for about 5 on each side. That's something that when I used to have my own facility, I had a physio who worked with me from Zimbabwe who had some of the coolest body hacks you can think of. But that one's been unbelievably effective. And what it'll do is it'll open up the lats, the traps. Again, it's very safe. But do that roughly 3 times a week, and that's really, really going to help clear up that space, give you a little bit more range of motion. So, because a lot of what you're doing is going to be this. And yeah, that'd be kind of sort of my basic recommendations. Again, mobility, all the basics, but kind of some more unique things you can try.
Gotcha. Thank you.
No, my pleasure.
All right. One thing that I wouldn't mind if you just address real quick is cardio type exercises during this preparation phase, pluses and minuses.
Sure. So with cardio, I heard one person said they're going on runs. Distance runs, they're not bad. They're not going to be, super advantageous for a sport like volleyball where the rest to work ratio is closer to 1-to-1, and sometimes you have more rest than work depending on if the coach really wants to put in some challenges or not. So what you want to do if you're doing conditioning, you absolutely want it to be more interval based. Right. So part of the program I'm going to send you, John, is we developed a quick kind of drill assessment where it's like think shuttle run concepts, but adding in some jumps into a shuttle run. And if you're going to be on the court, a volley, when it comes to movement, you're looking at 5 to 15 seconds of actual movement before you've got rest again. So you don't have to be hyper specific, but have that in mind. So if you're doing some quick change of direction, which you're going to want to do as well, right? You don't need to do a ton of volume there. You don't. Again, you want to grow that volume at roughly 10 to 15% week over week. But if you're doing conditioning work, I'd work on rapid explosion. Like I was just doing testing the other day for some stuff, and all I was doing was sitting in kind of defensive stance, taking off 3 steps to my left, rest, about 5-10 seconds, take off 3 steps to my right, rest. And I was just doing, 3 sets of 5 of those in each direction, right? Because that's, it's helping with that quick stop and go, which is what you need to build more so than actual cardiovascular endurance. You need to build more of that quick recovery after explosive movement. So if you're doing anything there, I just work it into intervals rather than doing, because I know we've talked about this in the past. Like a lot of people do like a mile run conditioning test. That does not translate to volleyball. It's different power systems in the body altogether.
Yeah. Yeah, you can work out for the same length of time. You just want to be aware of the work to rest ratio and get it closer to the sport, because we're not a steady state sport. We're an explosion, rest, recover sport. All right. Unless you ladies have any other questions, we can cut you loose and shift the focus over. Bailey, you got something?
I'm okay. I'm just taking it all in, like she said.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'll get the recording off to you guys so you can look it over again.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you two for taking part.
Of course.
Good virtually meeting you.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, so for the attendees, we're going to shift our focus now to more of a what should we be doing once we get into preseason. So hopefully the athletes will have done at least some of this already, but we all know that we can't necessarily rely on that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We have, again, a number of programs that the players have VERTs for compliance purposes. The coaches have no access to that information. I cannot share anything about that information. So I will speak in unbelievably general terms. You for the most part know the players on your team, unless you're on a brand new team. You know the players on your team who are at home, who are putting in the work. So while, one kind of theory is everyone's coming in on an even playing field, so jump numbers are going to be kind of the same for all my middles and the same for all my outsides. If we're being honest, you can have some liberty to say, all right, this is a junior or senior. This athlete works their face off. I may want to start them at a higher jump number, a higher load number. Then, never before do we need to be more careful with our incoming freshmen, though. Period. The lack of playing club and all those things, that their work capacity is more than likely, almost definitely, at an all-time low for probably the last 10 years of their life. Right.
Yeah.
So I honestly don't, the more I've had conversations, the more we look at it, not a ton will necessarily need to change for your more experienced players. Hopefully they know what they're doing. But I am, as I know you are, and all the coaches are, just more concerned with those young players, those incoming freshmen in particular.
So just to give people some context, and we can kind of use this as a framework to talk about things. I'm in Division III, so the support that goes around it and the commitment to 12 months of volleyball or any sport, isn't the same. For some of the kids, they're multi-sport athletes. Others, returning players, the season is relatively short in D3, shorter than the other ones anyway. Mm-hmm. You only have 16 opportunities to get together in the off season. They don't have the 8 hours that you have in D1 and D2. So, and of course, then the summer is like with everybody, we're not allowed to be monitoring them. So I kind of look at it in a lot of ways like it's probably similar to a high school situation where you're talking mainly athletes who don't even have club. Because at least those athletes, they probably would have played quite a bit, trained quite a bit in the spring. These athletes probably haven't done it. Some of these players may not have played at all, especially with COVID, since November. because they didn't get a spring season, because that would have happened in April this year, kind of toward the end of the men's season. So I'm definitely relying on them to get done what they can get done. Hopefully we have a preseason and we can go from there. But as I kind of mentioned before, the structure that we're looking at right now, based on most recent guidelines, which of course could change, was get them into the small groups. As far as I'm aware, we'll be allowed to do ball stuff at that stage.
Okay.
Smaller groups, but we'll be allowed to do ball stuff. Whereas in other places, you're hearing about people starting up no balls, no contact, or you have your own ball and you can't share balls. So at least right now I don't have to deal with that, which creates its own problems. So, looking at that first week where we're not going to be playing 6v6, but we can play small-sided games, which can certainly achieve plenty of intensity anywhere on the spectrum. That's not an issue. When we had the discussion with Natasha, where we talked a little bit about don't do testing the first day. Give it a few days before you do anything like a jump test or a shuttle test, anything along those lines. So let's look at that. So before any testing, and I don't even know if I'm going to do any, I haven't made that decision yet. What sort of activities should we be doing in those first few days to prepare them for, let's say, we're going to do testing?
So I want to show this here. This is where I like to kind of start. It's a good visual where you're talking about some people have balls, some people don't have balls. We'll start with the ideal scenario, right? I had I don't know if you saw the video, I did a good talk with Karch and Jimmy Stitz with the national team.
Okay.
Now they're in a very different situation because they won't have a match for a very extended period of time, but they're preparing their athletes to go abroad to go back to train with their clubs, to play. And I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but when you look at in sports, things tend to trickle down, right? So with NBA, right, pro sports, they have typically 10 to 12 weeks of conditioning and building the athlete before they start their camp. Now, why do they do that? Those athletes are worth a lot of money. We need to keep them healthy, right? But the science supports, you would like to have 8 weeks of foundational building time to get them ready to play their sport.
Right.
We know that's not realistic. Yep. But when you look at this chart, this one's over 6 weeks. What I like about this is, again, it goes over the concept. Like you said, you could do a small group, fairly high intensity work, which is fine because the volume ideally will be low but higher intensity. What we want to look at is, we'll use easy numbers. If we had 6 weeks, right, the kids would come in and it would be 80% foundational, no ball, movement quality, just getting some movement in, some not necessarily high intensity, but just getting that kind of foundation built. And then 20% would be maybe a little ball play, like a little actual volleyball. And again, I know this isn't what we can do, but just bear with me.
Right. Yep.
And then what you're looking at is kind of a sliding scale. So as you go week to week, it starts to shift from that 80-20 to 70-30, 60-40, 50-50. And then eventually it's the other way around, where 80% of what you're doing is playing volleyball and only 20% is, maybe that 20% is that neuromuscular training, just that, 15 to 20 minute warm up you do prior, and then we start playing volleyball. This has been shown to be the most effective means of getting an athlete prepared and decreasing risk of both acute and chronic workload. I talked in the previous conversation, in case some people weren't there for that these neuromuscular training, like these basic 15 to 20 minute movement warm-ups, have shown to decrease acute injury rates dramatically, ranging from 30 to 70%. They have not been shown to decrease chronic injury rates nearly as much.
Uh-huh.
The only way to do that, to decrease those chronic overuse injuries, is workload progression on the court. Right. So having this kind of a concept. So I do like the fact that if you have them for small groups, and it's almost like spring where you may be a little bit more limited.
Yeah.
I would say it's a good thing. You don't have to be as afraid to go relatively high intensity, but you still want to make sure that volume isn't too high. Then the question is, what the frick is too high? Right. And that's it. That's the question. And so this is that other thing I shared earlier where you're looking at, 10 to 15% increase week over week. But by the time your first game comes, you will not have been able to start them at 40 jumps because you'll only be at like 65 jumps a day.
Exactly.
And you want to be you don't want the first time these kids experience 100 jumps to be their first match.
Right.
All right. So that means we're going to need to start closer to those averaging 80 jumps per day range if you've got 2.5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So that by the end of it, you're averaging, honestly, kind of at the very least in those low 100 range.
Sure.
I've done some research, as I mentioned to you. We look back at a number of programs, and what's fascinating is this is what the typical periodization, and again, this is Division I, but we have your camps. Most jumps happen in the beginning of the season because you got your 2-a-days, and it's great. Like some programs that throughout the year, they're averaging, 80 jumps per practice. The first week are averaging 200 per practice.
Per practice or per day?
Per day.
Okay.
Per day. Yeah, per day. Because, 2 days we count as one practice in terms of load, right? You can't say, I did 100 this in the morning, I did 100 in the afternoon. Well, that's a 200 jump day.
Right.
So they're averaging 200 jumps a day, 180 to 200. And some of those programs have, been okay with injuries, but at the same time, right now, especially, I would really, really sway away from that. So one of the ways you can do this, and admittedly, this will be easier if you obviously have jump depth, is to say, all right, I'd like us to do this practice. In a normal year, this is a practice I'd like us to do, right? This would be the volume. One of the things that I've actually talked to Natasha about is if that's the volume, that would be like a high day for us. Only go to 60% as a high day.
Okay.
With the thought in the back of your mind, we're doing that with the assumption that our athletes are still more deconditioned than they otherwise would have been.
Right.
All right. Admittedly, a lot of this is, I'm not going to say completely arbitrary. There's obviously it's science backed, but you kind of have to start from somewhere, and what that number is arbitrary. So with the USA national team, they're training right now, but 2 weeks ago, 60 jumps in the practice. That was it. They'd stop. So Karch would ask Jimmy, he's like, Jimmy, understanding the intensity, like serves are a higher intensity tendon load impact. Okay.
Yep.
Don't start practice off like, welcome back everyone. It's going to be a, low intensity day. So we're just going to work on serves today. But that's a mistake that can be easily made.
Yeah. I can see a lot of coaches thinking like that because they don't look at jump serves, at least float serves. Topspin serves, different story, but they don't see a jump float serve as a max jump. And it doesn't seem like it's the intensity.
And I get it. And we were doing the same thing. I was having this conversation with basketball, with high school. Same idea. It's like, we didn't do anything today. We just did jump shots. Like, yeah, it took 500 jump shots. Cardiovascularly, not intense. The guys aren't sweating. Neurologically and from a tendon load perspective, very intense. I mean, again, that's why I recommend to the girls to do those little hops to build the tendon capacity to handle those kind of things. So, that's the sad thing, right? As a coach, you think you're doing the right thing by saying, we'll start with serves. I'm going to slowly build my athletes up. And then completely inadvertently, you're actually setting them up for more, chronic and even potentially acute issues.
Right.
So, that's where Jimmy will say, all right, coach, what is your plan? and then we'll throw 25 at this, 20 at this, 15 at this, and that's kind of how they structure it. But it is structured, especially now, more around volume than it is, because you can do so much other skill work, as you know, that doesn't require jumping. But when it comes to your jumps, it's building that volume up is critical. But we are so lucky. This is the only sport where we literally know. Where is it? Here we go. We literally know what our target is. Like, these are the jump numbers, right? I mean, these are averages, but this is it. This is what we want to have them physically ready for. And yes, you obviously have to develop skill. That's why you're going to have days where you'll build that jump number into way higher than this. Like, your middles can be hitting that 180, 200 number after we've given them time to build up to it.
Sure.
But when we look at specifically, physically, what they need to be able to handle, this is what they're going to be handling on average. And I know in other presentations with you, I've shown the number. Middle blocker, 160. That's about the max they're going to get in a 5-setter.
Yep.
Outside, 120. Your outside is, again, this is a combination of 3 rotation and 6 rotation. Your 3 rotation outside average is closer to 60 jumps a game.
Yeah, right, exactly, because no back row attacks, no serving.
Yeah.
Or minimal serving.
So you have to also keep that in mind. If you've got a 3 rotation player, again, I'm not talking about reps for skill development. We're talking purely in the physiological side. If you got a 3 rotation player, you don't have to have them jumping nearly as much. If you got a 6 rotation player, you're going to kind of need to ramp them up a little bit faster. If you got a 6 rotation player with an injury history, ramp them up slower and just deal with poor play the first few games because you need them later in the season.
Yeah, exactly. So I think kind of like the traditional 2-a-day model that you talked about is usually has the kids sore to the point of barely being able to move by about day 3.
Yeah.
That's usually when they hit it. Day 3, day 4, they're really, really suffering. And then the adaptation has started to come in and, and things get a bit easier. But, if you're doing 200 jumps your first day or your first 2 days.
And so that's the thing. There's a lot of programs. I know you've had speakers on here too on the 2 days where they're like, our morning practice, there are virtually no jumps.
Mm-hmm.
Working on skill work, working on footwork, working on passing.
Yep.
Maybe there are some serves, but we're talking 30, per player.
Or like my friend Ruben, if there's anything that's supposed to replicate a jump serve, it's not from a box.
Yeah. And you start to also build that shoulder because we can't forget about that. You want to build that up as well.
Exactly.
And then they do some jumps in the afternoon, which that's a model I do really, really, really like.
Yeah.
The other thing too I like to bring up is even though we are not as worried about our liberos, right? We still want to make sure because liberos have the biggest discrepancy. And I don't recall if this is something I'd gone over with you previously, but liberos have the biggest discrepancy between match load and practice load of any position.
Okay.
So essentially, I can stop sharing for a moment. Essentially what that means is liberos practice, we've found, can be roughly 40% lower on average than their match load.
Wow.
And for those who don't know, the way we're collecting that information is the sensor around the waist picks up on not just jumps and landings, but also energy. So any dynamic movement made, we can measure essentially the impact on the body. So that's kind of how we measure our load. And why that's interesting is not as much from, most of what we're talking about is injury mitigation, but from a performance standpoint as well. And I just like to throw this one in. This is something that a physio with an Italian pro team, one of the top Italian pro teams, he brought up, something he started doing with his players, is when we have those numbers for jumps, right, that 103, 105, 83, middles and outsides, all right, we have our target, and most programs throughout the season do a good job of, on average, kind of having kind of a 1-to-1 ratio of like practices look kind of like a match.
Right.
Some are going to be higher, some are going to be lower. But libero is not so much. And this is almost an off-topic tip, but kind of like those serve things. One of the things I'd recommend programs start looking at, and I recognize, obviously, this would be easier to do if you can monitor it, but even if you can't, is when you have a day where, admittedly, your libero shouldn't be diving around every practice like they do in a match. They're going to probably fall apart. But after you finish your practice, you might find like, all right, we got, 80 to 100 jumps in. Your libero to them, that was probably the equivalent of like 2 sets played,
right.
Maybe 3. So that's where you kind of take them aside and work on more position-specific agility just to help bring their capacity up. Mm-hmm. Because if their capacity is behind, while injury risk does go up a little bit and it's not a concern, that's where you start to see those athletes lose a little bit of that first step quickness in the 5th set. It's so hard to quantify. You kind of see it. You think you see it. But that's another kind of tip where you can take them aside and say, all right, we're not going to work on diving and passing, but let's just work on, it's a little stop and go, a little movement, volleyball specific, just to bring that capacity up. And what you can start doing is just say, all right, we're going to do, 10 extra minutes after practice for the first week, 15 minutes after practice for the next week. And then even throughout the season on a hard day, you say, all right, you're going to do an extra 20 minutes today. I think that can also be very advantageous.
Yeah.
To kind of building that capacity too.
Because I can completely visualize why this would be an issue for leaves, because a lot of times they're in drills where they are performing skill-wise, but not necessarily physically wise. Mm-hmm. They're passing the ball for the middles or something along those lines, where it's like they're there to start the rally, but there's not a lot that they're doing physically in that sort of role. So yeah.
I'm always talking about jumpers, and I feel bad. I'm like leaving out liberos. I got to feed them something. But going back to the thing with Gina and her back, I see back issues with liberos quite frequently, and part of it I'm sure has to be posture related, mm-hmm. because they don't get to extend upward quite as much as front row players do. But that's one of those things you got to work out the balance, just like you have to do with the hitters. Yeah, and speaking of balance, I know I've shown you this one before, and again, this was from spring, but it's just an example. We did kind of an internal study. We looked at about 24 programs, a dozen that grew their volume kind of strategically week over week throughout the spring. Mm-hmm. Now, again, you don't have the time to start at 52 jumps.
Right.
I know the NCAA was, for at least Division I, had been talking about extending it to 6 weeks with coaches and then treating it like spring where you just have hours limitations.
Okay.
Now, they've been talking about this for forever. It just failed the vote. I'm hoping that it failed only because of COVID, because there's literally not many other reasons in my mind. Like, that would be so physically advantageous to the athletes to give the coaches the opportunity to genuinely start at averaging 50 to 60 a day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then build over a 5 to 6 week time frame up to those 100, 150 numbers, and then grow up to those, capping at around 200 mid-season.
Right.
Like, that would be unbelievably advantageous. And the proof is in the pudding. Every program that did this, that slowly did this, had about a 1.2 to 1.3 inch increase in the team's average vertical by the end of spring. The programs that did not, the programs that started here at not here, more like the 80s to 100 range.
Sure.
And we're kind of all over the place, had an average decrease of 1.2 inches.
Okay. Just over the course of a season. Yeah.
And this was just the spring, over the course of the spring.
Right, yeah.
At the end of spring, they were jumping lower. And look, there's a ton of variables, obviously. But harping on what I've been talking about so much, when people look at that tendon capacity, right? I talked to you a lot about tendon and muscle imbalance. Mm-hmm. That tendon is more than just that connective tissue holding the muscle to the bone. It plays a massive role in ground reaction force.
Right.
It absorbs and returns that energy. And if if there's dysfunction at the tendon and it cannot return that energy, you will not be able to jump as high.
Yeah.
Period. You will also be landing harder. So,
yeah, well, which brings in stuff we've talked about before in terms of the link of hard landings, not just to back stuff,
yeah,
but to knees and ankles and everything else along the chain.
It's going to go through the knees to get to the back.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I did want to, I left this slide in here mainly because it says new for 2020. So it makes me laugh every time because if you recall, we put this together. I've been working on it for 2.5 years, and then 3 days after we finished it, everything shut down.
Yeah.
But mainly if people viewing can look to the left at that kind of green area. Can you see my mouse on that right now?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. This green area. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this because we've been talking about it a lot. When we're talking about those kind of 10 to 15% increases in load week over week, again, we might start a little higher than we want. We try not to start too high. Just be conscious of your weekly average as best you can. Even if you're just using RPEs, that's still an effective way of doing it.
Yeah. That's rate of perceived exertion.
Rate of perceived. That's where the athlete is saying, scale of 1 to 10, how you feeling? I guess I should talk about this right now. The bare minimum, be you D3, D2, D1, high school. And we're actually going to have on our website by either today or early next week, we have a return to play page we've created. It's specifically for high schools. You'll be able to find it www.returntoplayproject.com.
Okay.
I'm going to put that in the chat thing.
Yep.
Returntoplayproject.com. We're working on that. Again, it's more specifically high school, but in there, a number of my colleagues have created an RPE sheet. It was done by Carlin Stilling, the researcher up at Calgary, Lauren Green, the head of sports performance at UC San Diego, and Carlos Daniel. He's the strength coach for Vanderbilt men's basketball. And again, as a bare minimum, great tool, and you'll do some of the same things here. But the idea here is, just so people know what you're looking at, you have a 0.8 and a 1.3. Research has shown that if we're training, it's a ratio of your last month of training to the 7 days you're in, your acute to your chronic. Because herein lies the challenge we're discussing is what is a high day if I don't know what we've done? Like how can you define a low, medium, and high day if you don't know what the athlete can handle?
Right.
You can't. So that's the challenge right now because we're all shooting a little in the dark as to where we start. So be conscious of it. And when you start there, be aware of after about 28 days, if you jumped, easy math, you jumped 100 times every day for the last month, you jump 100 times this week, you're at a 1-to-1 average. That's a ratio, rather. 1, you're at a 1. All right, there's not a lot of adaptation going on because you want undulation. So if you jumped 100 times in this week, we say, hey, we're pushing. We're going to jump to 130. You're at a 1.3 on the ratio. If you say, hey, we're going to slow down, deload a little bit, we're going to go to 80, you're at a 0.8. Research has shown that going above that 1.3, increasing too quickly, once you understand what their capacity is, injury risk likelihood increases. That's it. That's what the science says.
Yep.
It increases almost exactly the same amount if the athlete becomes deconditioned. And what we have to be conscious of is almost everyone is starting in the red right now.
Yeah.
So we want to bring them up, but again, we can't have, you just don't want these massive weekly changes. Daily changes aren't as big a deal. Again, you don't want them to be insane. But if you do have that high day, and let's say end of the, whatever, on a Wednesday, we're saying first week we're going to average 90 jumps. And one day you hit 130. Please, the next day, give them recovery.
Yeah.
Right? So that next day should be maybe a 40 or 50.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that your weekly average is 90. But you still want that variability throughout the week because that's where you get that higher adaptation, and that's where you can also allow recovery while they're still improving.
Yeah.
But that's why I like to show that visuals, because it's, again, every year there's more and more research that comes out to support it. The challenge is, if you do start too high, that can have a resounding effect throughout the season. Nothing's guaranteed. You know, you can smoke your whole life and live to be 90, but not necessarily highly likely.
Right. Exactly. All right. Rodrigo, he's still on. He had some questions earlier. I don't know if he still has them, but feel free to chime in if you want to, Rodrigo. To the RPE thing, and I think we talked about this before. In terms of the deloading, this was especially something that Stanford, why am I blanking on his name right now? Hambly, talked about at Stanford, where they traditionally, as many programs did, slowed down the jumps in practice as the season went along. Because a lot of people do shorter practices in the progression of the course of the season. But they found out that if they actually, instead of deloading and reducing RPE, because I think that's what they were really measuring primarily, they were doing a better job of maintaining the RPE up into the target zone. It helped reduce injuries at the end of the season. So they were better conditioned when it came to the NCAA tournament.
So the average jump by month here, I would love to see this inverse, just completely flipped.
Yeah.
For that reason, it's the same. They use the acute to chronic workload concept. I've talked to Kevin a lot about it. Same exact idea is if you train, you know, the catchphrase is train smart and hard.
Yeah.
So that's where, if you do start lower, you can build. So even if, and again, it's challenging right now, but if we still look at a bit more of a vacuum, if you start at 60 jumps and slowly grow, then, you know, maybe after a month, this player's average, average jump, if you can see this, is right. They're at a 1 right now, right? So their average jumps is 65.
Right.
If we were to have this player averaging like a 1.2, 1.3, meaning we're having a roughly 20% increase in those jump volumes as a weekly average, not daily, but as a weekly average, then, 2 weeks from now, their chronic medium day might be, 78. And if you slowly progress them that way, yes, absolutely. Research, I will not say absolutely, but research has shown you can have them better conditioned, still have a decreased injury risk while having them jump more.
Right.
It's just about how you get there.
Yeah.
It's how you get there. And then the question is, how high do you need to get? And that's also still up for debate, because some people do this, but they'll bring their kids up to really, really, really high jump numbers. And in the end, even though there's no injury that season, there's only so much cartilage in the knee.
Right.
And oftentimes those athletes, again, there's life after volleyball. Be conscious of that. Which goes to the other point that I know I've mentioned to you before, and it's something neat that myself and only a handful of people in my company have been able to see, where you look at, Elite Eight, Final Four, National Championship, usually roughly 80% or more of those people have our system. So we get to look at their jump numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And again, as I've said before, on many occasions, look, these talent levels, very similar between these teams.
Yeah,
and it's like,
exactly. Yep.
I happen to know that the team that won on a couple of occasions, more than a couple of occasions in the national championship, but in like the Elite 8 and 16, in some cases jump less than half as often on a weekly basis. Less than half as the team they beat.
Sure.
Doesn't mean jumping less is better. Certainly doesn't mean jumping more is better. It's about efficiency.
Right. So they use their jumps well.
Exactly. Like, use them well. Like, we've got teams that take it to a bit of an extreme where, like, don't jump in your celebrations. You lost a jump. but but it does help the players and the coaches themselves just be more efficient and targeted. If you practice the way you play, that tends to translate better anyway. So, and to that point, I guess one of the last things I'll say before, if there are any other questions, but I've had this conversation too with a number of programs, looking at how you design what you're doing when in your practice is also really, really important. So we'd go through and you'd look at, you want to compare like your 6v6. Like in this part of practice, we're trying to play like it's a match, right? So one of the things that our clients will do is we'll compare our actual match jump numbers to your 6v6 jump numbers. Sure. Like why is it that our players are jumping on average 2 inches lower in 6v6? Well, you're playing your 6v6 after an hour and 20 minutes of practice.
Yeah.
So if we want 6v6 to mimic match, let's start practice the way we start a game. Warm up, go through a neuromuscular training program, go through a mobility, and play our 6v6.
Yeah.
Then look at what we want to fix, and then train, adapt, practice a little more. So it's just, it's been really cool because people are starting to they've had the time to really look at it more so than ever before. Like what's work? What can I change? Let's see here.
It's going to be interesting to see how much experimentation gets done during the season, whenever the season takes place, wherever it takes place.
Part of me thinks there'll be a little bit at the beginning, and then people are going to fall into old habits.
Yeah, that's pretty typical.
For better or for worse. But I think you've been the tip of the spear for a lot of this. I'm sure you've lost track with how many of these you've done.
It's over 50, but after that, I'm not 100% sure.
Plus 50. And I've lost track of how many of these calls I've done, which is only a sign that more people than ever before, especially in the coaching side, are able to take the time. You can only watch so much film to learn more about the physiological side of athlete training and development. Because you guys, the skill. I'm never going to speak to the skill development side. Even though I'm better now after all these conversations I've had with coaches. But yeah, on the physical side, not rocket science.
Right.
It's just, from my side, heck, I've been pushing the NCAA, is getting coaches simply not even the resources, just the time, the opportunity to do it correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, when you were talking about the celebratory jumps counting, I had this image of hard landings. Like, I wonder how many hard landings happen during celebratory
You bring
jumps.
that up, but I'll tell you right now, and I know they won't mind sharing this, but with University of Florida, this is when we first doing the landings, like first analyzing it, when I first noticed the trend of serves, and it was Shina Joseph, if you remember her. She's a freak athlete. She's now the Canadian national team. She's awesome. And I'm looking at her data. I'm like, the heck is this? They're like 8 to 10 inch jumps, and her landings are all like 20s. And so I call Matt Delancey, their trainer. I'm like, the frick's going on here? He's like, that's them getting pumped. And I'm like, I know exactly what you're talking about. They all do this hop before the match. Again, not a big deal. It'll be okay. It was more like when I'm looking at it as a naked data side, I'm like, the frick's going on here? And then once he told me, it's like, I remember. Yeah, I know exactly what they're doing. But yeah, again, it's a balance. Okay, It doesn't mean you take away. You're not allowed to celebratory jump.
Well, hey, this year you're not. In some places you're not allowed to go celebrate at all.
Well, yeah, don't. No more jumping and bumping each other. You got to do it from far away.
Go hugging each other after a kill or whatever. Yeah. Although the interesting thing for me is I noticed that in pro soccer with the European leagues, they started that way. Like no goal celebrations where everybody comes and mops together, but now they're back to what looks like normal.
It's you have the go big or go home concept, and I know we're all trying to be as safe as we can. You have to be cognizant of these things, but you also have to recognize telling girls not to come in together after scoring a point is like trying to take. Not that you want to do this, but trying to train, don't swing your arms back when you get ready for an attack. It's like it's a set motor pattern.
Right. Yeah.
Like
You
there
gotta create
are
all new habits.
there are like synapses in their brain that have been formed and thickened to do that afterwards. It's not as though they're thinking about it.
Yeah. Lots of myelin.
Yeah. So, so again, you pick the battles.
Right.
Right. But hopefully this information is going to be helpful to people. As you know, we've been sending out these reports as much as we can to everybody.
Yeah.
We even, I will say this, because as you know, I don't sell, but I will say we did create an essentials package that's like 2 units that we're discounting, so that if teams are trying to bring players back, you can at least monitor a middle and an outside and kind of let them represent those position groups as kind of a bare minimum. Because I've just been racking my brain. I feel so bad. I'm talking to all these people about these jump numbers, and then they're like, "Frick, David, my budget's frozen." I'm like, all right, so what can we do to at least get a parent get something to give you something? So I will throw that out there, because that's actually been really popular.
Okay.
People just to at least have a gauge, because this is the only sport where we know if we can count this, we're at a massive advantage.
Yeah. All right. Well, appreciate you coming on.
No,
Lots of fun as
appreciate
always.
you having me as always. Yeah. Anything else, let me know, even though I've done quite a few of these with you.
This is number 3.
Running out of knowledge to give you, John.
I'm sure you'll find some new things in all the data that you're collecting. That's always the fun part.
Yeah, they always pop up. All right, sir. Well, it's a pleasure.
All right. Have a good one. Stay safe.
You too. Bye.